One of the things I want to ask you guys, there was at one point I think in Super Touring you were probably representing the top rear-wheel drive and top front-wheel drive drivers in the championship, so I'm going to sort of stir the pot a little bit and get you to tell me the strengths and weaknesses of those two and whether really it was fair that BMW to have the extra weight. So I'll start with you, John, though, because when you came into the championship with the 2-litre regs, it was you versus a load of BMWs.
Yeah,
so you were the lone fighter for a while, really.
I think I was the first person, or the first manufacturer to beat the BMWs, because up to that point they'd won all the time.
What year was that?
90. Yeah,
When the RS 500s were in the main
right.
class.
They were 1991 and then 92. So yeah, the truth, I've spent my life driving front-wheel drive cars and made a healthy living from it being a professional driver. I hate front-wheel drive.
I did not think you would say that.
Absolutely hate front-wheel drive. The thing that I used to love most of all was getting on a plane, going to Australia and doing Bathurst in one of those 5-litre V8s. So I think the beginning of front-wheel drive, they would understeer, they would do all the horrible things. As they progressed through and they were developed and mechanically they became better, they didn't drive like front-wheel drive cars, but I still I'd have preferred a BMW, I think.
And what about you, Steve? Obviously early days in Super Touring, before it was even known as Super Touring, the BMWs were given quite a lot of weight, which I guess only kind of came off as the front-wheel drive cars got better. So was there a peak moment where you thought that, you know, I guess 93?
I don't know. Peak moment. Probably any driver has an advantage. A peak moment. I think in '92, without going back into all of that.
I wasn't going to ask you about that.
But '92, we had ABS on the car, and that was a huge advantage. So probably my favourite area was '92, apart from the incident with my best friend here.
I would agree with that, because we tested, we knew they had ABS, and when you got to, I think Knockhill was really wet, Pembrey and places like that were wet, and they were just amazing on the brakes that we just couldn't live with. And we were trying to develop ABS on the Cavalier. And I was testing it at Donington. There was 2 rounds to go in the championship, Donington and Silverstone, and I was testing it, and it was the last time we ever did an open test with Formula Fords and Vauxhall Juniors and everything in there. And a Formula Ford came across in front of me. I went onto the wet grass, couldn't stop it, couldn't spin it because the ABS was kicking all the brakes off, and I hit the wall at the end of the old hairpin and broke my sternum and my back. And that's why I should just have said enough's enough, but I was leading the championship still. And that's the next 2 races were full of painkillers and full of foam padding and one thing and another. So yeah, it's interesting.
How long did it take you to recover from that? Because you were suffering quite a bit even in the Silverstone finale, weren't you, in '92?
Yeah.
Was it kind of better by the start of the following season?
It was better by the start of the following season, but the race at Donington with the penultimate round, fortunately, it was wet. So I could run in the race with the seatbelts virtually undone, so that it wasn't pulling my shoulders back and opening up my sternum. And by the time we got to Silverstone, I had a doctor that was giving me some serious jags. So there's this great picture of me climbing out of the car at the corner that it all happened at, looking like an American football player with a big shoulder. Now my shoulders are not normally that size, it was just full of padding, and that was because of the accident.
I would have got out of my car and fronted you up if I'd known all of that.
That's why I didn't tell you anything.
Yeah, don't lay on a weakness.
Yeah. You see, everybody keeps talking about '92 one eye and another, but what very few people know is that Steve and I had actually shared the car. In '83, I think it was, the Will Hire 24-hour race with Tony Lanfranchi, Steve and myself. So we knew each other a long time before. We'd spent 24 hours in a car together. So it wasn't just that one incident that we knew each other from. All right.
Yeah. No, I mean we were friends before, and we were, after sort of a few months of that and the court case tribunal, we were mates again, you know. It's fine.
And for some of the people that don't actually know what happened, I phoned Steve the night before the court case when it was all going to get messy, and I said, Steve, I think we should go in holding hands. I'm not going to get a championship back. One of us is going to lose our licence. It could be you, it could be me, who knows. We just can't take the chance. And we didn't even tell the lawyers. All I told was my wife, and when I phoned Steve, and I said, we'll go in holding hands and we'll just say it was a racing incident. And he said, nah, I don't trust you. Is that right?
I said, yeah, okay, fine, you say first and I'll follow.
So he just didn't trust me, basically. And that's what we did.
You're a motor dealer, aren't you? I'm not going to trust you.
And didn't you then start a driving standards thing as well between you as well, which must have been quite tricky timing, I must imagine.
Yeah, it was the sort of gamekeeper type poacher. So
yeah, we did. We all put, I think we put £2,000 each in to a fund, and we created the sort of TOCA driving standards, and we helped to pay for the helicopter to be at the rounds if there was somebody had an accident, and then it just evolved from there. But yeah, it worked.
Yeah, I think some good things came out of it, for sure. It certainly put BTC on the map, because that weekend there was nothing else going on, so John and I were front page on Autosport and motoring everywhere. So unfortunately they took a dim view of what happened and they wanted to blame someone, but as John said, we got around that. We went in as sort of bride and groom, looking like we loved each other.
Alan Gow's complaint was in the last round, so he couldn't make the most of all the publicity.
Yeah, I mean,
it's typical Alan, isn't it?
Yeah, but the last round of this championship for years has always been quite entertaining. There's always been something happening, and listen, we could go over it and over it, but there was lots of good things came out of it, and there was lots of publicity, and I think that particular event just magnified what British touring cars was all about.
And another parallel that you guys have got is you probably had your greatest super touring achievement in 1995. So Johnny won your second British touring car title with the RML Cavalier, and Steve won in Japan, which perhaps didn't get as much coverage over here as it probably should have done. So can you compare the Japanese scene of those times with Britain and Germany that we'd be more familiar with?
I mean, every championship is different, so Japan was unique and very different. It's funny because in the paddock they were desperate to beat us, but actually the sportsmanship of the drivers and the manners of the drivers in racing was far better in Japan than it is in Europe. So I could do moves on people that I would never consider putting my car on the outside of someone in BTC or DTM. So it's the same as DTM or BTC. Every championship is better and different to others. It's difficult to compare. Japan was very, very large in Japan, but yeah, over here it was a bit diluted.
You had a lot of manufacturers you're up against there, wasn't you? All the homegrown.
And it's some star drivers as well. We had Tom Christensen out there, Mikael Groom, Andrew Gilbert-Scott. Obviously, my teammate Winklock came out to help me. Anthony Reid was there. There was a lot of sort of class act and a lot of Japanese drivers like Sakia and people like that. It was a good championship. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think you said that Schnitzer didn't even go out there, coming backwards and forwards. So
yeah, they never had premises out there. They run the cars out of the trucks and commuted backwards and forwards. So it was a good effort by them.
Yeah, pretty amazing. Now, John, obviously you were at the same time winning the British Touring Car Championship with the Cavalier, but that was obviously with RML. We're celebrating 40 years of RML, and I think your car's just been out on track. But how did that car, with the wings and RML prepared, compared to the Dave Cook cars that you were fighting the BMWs with early in the 90s?
Ray Mallock had a completely different approach to racing, to building cars. If it wasn't necessary, it wasn't put in the car. It was absolutely the bare minimum of everything that went in race cars, and they were pretty strong despite all that. What changed touring cars through that era was the fact that we had 3 different tyre manufacturers. We had Michelin, Dunlop and Yokohama. They all had a strength and a weakness during a race or qualifying. Also, as soon as we put wings on them, they weren't brilliant, but they gave them a bit more front end when you had a splitter and a rear wing. it did help make the cars a lot more drivable. And the fact that you had Williams in there doing the Renaults, you had Tom Walkinshaw, Arrows Formula One, in doing the Volvos. There were some really big players came into that. And if you look back down to a list of some of the touring car drivers that have come to play in the BTCC, they've gone on to win Le Mans multiple times, or they've been single-seater drivers or whatever. I mean, it's been a great breeding ground for talent for years.
I mean, who apart from each other would you least like to see appear in the mirror on a charge?
Apart from here.
Apart from John.
It's probably easier to say the guys who I would trust. I would trust the late departed Will Hoy with my pocket money. He and I could race side by side on any track. Rickard Rydell, I could do the same with him. Alan Menu, I couldn't. So I would probably have to say Menu chewed lumps out the back of my bumper many, many times over a number of seasons. So he'd probably be the guy I would be concerned was maybe going to touch me more. But there was nobody out there that I was really afraid of as a driver. There was people you gave huge respect for, and you gave them a wide berth if you could. But there's a whole bunch of guys further back on the grid that I wouldn't take a lift to the pub from. You know?
What about you, Steve? Who stood out for you?
I don't know, as John said, back then, later in the 90s, the standard of drivers in BTC, and the manufacturers were spending so much running the cars that they were prepared to, you know, employ the best drivers they could, whether they were Italians or Dutch or English or French or whatever. So there's a huge talent of drivers, and most of them were pretty remarkable drivers. You know, if you won a race against that lot, you felt you'd achieved something. I don't know who I wouldn't want in my mirror. The people who sort of shone out in my estimate was one of his teammates, Ivan Muller. I thought he was a bit of a star, car control and always competitive. Menu's a friend of mine, a hard, good racer. There's like, if you go back to their heyday, there's probably 20 people you wouldn't want in your mirror.
Sorry, John, do you want to add?
No, I was going to say that if you just run your finger down 95, 96, 97, the drivers in the various manufacturer cars, we had 10 manufacturers, 2-car teams, highly paid drivers to do a professional job. And at the end of 99, 2000, that finished. I mean, there was very few people getting paid after that, and I think we got the best of it.
Well, that was one of the questions I was going to pitch you. What was it doomed to failure? Was there a point? Was there anything that could have been done to stop the budgets getting bigger and bigger? I mean, obviously Alpha's coming in, moving the goalposts and putting wings on seems to be a bit of a milestone moment. Is there anything that could have been done to stop it all getting a bit carried away, or was it inevitably going to? I
think it was inevitable. The manufacturers were winning races on a Sunday and selling cars on a Monday, and that was really what made the manufacturers all get involved in it. And BMW particularly was a manufacturer that built race cars that they sold on the road. Well, Vauxhall, for instance, made a road car and we turned into a race car. So I kind of wish I'd worked for a manufacturer that was really in it, like BMW, like Mercedes or someone like that produced a race car and went, oh, that's quite good, we'll make that for the road as well. Well, everything I drove was the other way around.
Just going back to the driver point. Also, we had, let's say, Le Mans winners, XF1 drivers, etc., etc. Now, Steve, you went from touring cars into FIA GTs and Le Mans after that. Do you think that the level that Super Touring got to enabled you to do that because you showed that you could go toe to toe with all these drivers?
Not really. I think I don't think it helped me get it. First time I did Le Mans was 1983, and I was, nothing and nobody then, so I still managed to find a drive. I don't know. I think any good driver stands out. If you look at the drivers at Le Mans today, I mean, there's some pretty spectacular drivers out there. In the top 10 cars, there's not one poor driver. They're They're all right up there. And you know, if you look at Formula E, there's a lot of Formula E drivers, which I think is, whether you hate it or like it, Formula E is so competitive. And at Le Mans, there's an awful lot of Formula E top drivers doing Le Mans. So I don't think BTC helped me in that situation. Certainly it helped my career in other ways, but it was a bubble that had to burst, because the manufacturer knows, you know, every manufacturer wants to be Pops or Ford or whatever, and they just kept spending and spending and spending. The only way would be to ban manufacturers, and then it's no good. It's not going to happen then. So I think it was a balloon that eventually had to burst. We were just lucky. We were in it in the heyday, and we enjoyed it and earned a good living from it.
Well, I think a lot of people did. That's why there's such a support even all this time later. Before we finish, I just want to ask sort of maybe a fun question to both of you. So if you could pick one super touring car, whether you drove or didn't drive, and one track you could go and do anywhere in the world that you'd like to go and do a race on, what car would you pick and where would it be?
I'd like to drive one of the Mondeos, because they were put together by ProDrive. They were proper things. They sounded great. They looked as though they were absolutely engineered to do a job of work, which they quite clearly did. I'd like to do that. I'd like to drive at Thruxton, because that's one of my favourite tracks. It's a pretty brave track, and one of those Mondeos around there I think would be great fun. But there's lots of cars I wish I had the opportunity to drive, like that Nissan Primera of Aiello's. Again, you just couldn't get near that car. And as Steve says, you know, he's not going to beat Jake Hill around here with that, because that was again a properly engineered car. So there's a whole raft of cars I'd love to drive.
Yeah, I felt like we sorted this out last year. We said that Jake shouldn't be allowed in that car after winning them all last. I need to have a chat with him and get him in one of the older cars, I think, so he hasn't got so much aero. But what about you, Steve?
I don't know. I was just thinking when John was saying what his wish list. I don't know. I mean, I don't need to drive first of all, front-wheel drive is, although I was brought up on front-wheel drive cars, I can drive them, but it's still foreign to me. So I'm more at home with a rear-wheel drive, so I'd probably stick with a BMW and, I don't know, either the old Nürburgring or Suzuka or something like that, just for fun.
I'd watch that. That sounds good. Well, thanks very much for everyone for listening. Thank you, John Cleland and Steve Soper. We'll be back at 2:30. Have a good day.